Well, first up, Senator, certainly Jim Edgar was, part of a different time. Not that long ago, but a different time, and it just seems like the way people viewed politics in Illinois, viewed everything at the Capitol, it was just it seems like a completely different era.
Well, it's obviously more hostile now than it certainly was in his time, and he was the kind of individual that worked with everybody. Well, he had to, because most of the time when he was governor, of course, Madigan was speaker, so he if he's going to get anything done, he had to work with the Democrats, and he was willing to do so. And he was that type of individual, very kind of unassuming, quiet. You had Jim Thompson, who was bigger than life, and then along comes Jim Edgar, and he was a different type of politician certainly than Thompson, but he was very effective, though. He was very good at what he did.
Well, it was a time too where it just seemed like having a downstate governor just provided a certain balance, and I think from a certain point of view that not only was good for downstate, but I think in Chicago, where you have just very different way of living at the time, the whole region, and different way of looking at the world, and it seemed to almost be to their benefit to have someone from down below I-80.
Well, yeah, way down south of southern Illinois, below I-80. But
yeah.
When I first got elected, it was more balanced in the whole process. Thompson was governor, and then when I first got elected, the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. But everybody worked together and knew that you had to work with each other to get anything done. Compromise was part of the process. Now, it's just one party, and they dominate the whole process, and I don't think that's good for the state at all. Certainly not when it seems to be that Chicago dominates it all. I mean, we have become more Republican downstate than what we were, and I think that we get sometimes the tail end of the bone when it comes to what's given out and what's done for, and most of it seems to be Chicago. It wasn't that way when Edgar or Thompson, for that matter. Everybody got their piece of the pie.
Now, I realize our audience isn't going to be concerned with Springfield immediately, Springfield's day-to-day life, but certainly when you think of the capital in Springfield and more jobs, a greater percentage of jobs being in Springfield pre-Blagojevich, it was definitely a better era and more stable on that front as far as folks living within 60 miles of Springfield, and you didn't have, I guess, some of the wild shakeups or migration of jobs like we've seen.
Yeah, that's definitely true. The old timers that are in Springfield will tell you that times back in the 80s, 90s were obviously much better for Springfield and for downstate than what they are today. And it was a different time when people did get along, and we'd fight and fuss on the House or Senate floor, and when that was over, why, we go out to dinner together. It's not that way anymore, and I think that's a negative. That's a downside for what's happening in Illinois.
It sure seemed like there were more thoughtful discussions back then, and it was, again, the era's changed so much. I just remember how big the state capitol press room was on the now departed mezzanine level, and now there are just a scattered few reporters without a lot of experience personally as a consumer, a home buyer, and all that stuff that makes you able to really get the stories that people need. It's pretty hard to imagine just how elevated the process was back then.
Well, I just think that it's just in my lifetime. I mean, my time in Springfield, which was over 30 years, what happened during those 30 years to the process and to what was being done and the compromise and how people work together, how it has changed so much. It's unfortunately very fractionalized, and this is not good. I don't believe good legislation comes from this type of process, but it's what we've got. And I guess back when Jim Edgar was governor, and we actually, in '94, I believe it was, we had every statewide office, Republicans I'm talking about, and controlled the House and the Senate. That now, when you look at it today and what's happened, that's a big movement politically for Illinois to go that far. So, but it was still a time when things were got done. There were some controversial things you had to do. You you just sat down and had to work it out, or you didn't get done, period. Nothing got done. And that wasn't the way it was back then.
Yeah, it didn't seem like you had the kind of animosity, and there was, you heard a lot more about the four tops, so to speak, back then, and I don't even hear them come up much. And of course, you being a former member of the four tops, the four legislative leaders.
Yeah, well, that is true. I don't even think the Republicans are invited to the meetings. I shouldn't say that. I don't know for sure, but I doubt it, because everything is decided in the caucuses of the Democrats, and that's not good. Not necessarily good policy comes from that. I mean, the better policy comes from compromise and people sitting down and working together. That's not what's happening now.
Well, I'm trying to think of the challenges of the 1990s. Certainly, you're in there for a couple of terms. There's going to be some critical moments, some tough budgeting years. What are your memories as far as just a fella who often talked about fiscal conservatism, and usually things worked out on that front in the end?
Well, Jim Edgar was considered Governor No. I mean, he had to say no to a lot of the spending. I mean, he did bring the fiscal responsibility back to the budgeting process. It kind of got out of hand a little bit there, and maybe we spent a little more than we should. And Edgar recognized that and said, no, we're not doing that anymore. He also addressed very controversially the budget or the pension issue. I mean, we had legislation that we passed during the 90s that had set the state on a process by which we would balance the budget and the pensions. What do I want to say? The liability that the pensions had, we were going to bring it back into balance. Well, Blagojevich changed all that, and then once that was done, Edgar's whole plan went off track, and so anyway, he was willing to meet the issues head on and deal with them that needed to be dealt with, and that pension issue, and still is today, hasn't been resolved.
I look at some folks in politics today, and one of the things, and again, I try to be careful about putting opinions out there, but I think some of this stuff just shines through, that you have folks who are in love with being a celebrity or being on TV, and they're more into that than groundbreakings and, doing the work and, making sure, the quote-unquote political versions, the government versions of the light bulb are working. And it just seems like Jim Edgar was a guy devoted to that aspect, making sure the trains run on time, to use yet another cliche.
Yeah, that was the difference. Thompson was a good governor. There's no doubt about Jim Thompson. But Jim Edgar had to stop the train. I mean, he really did, because it was getting out of control, and Jim Edgar did that. I mean, he just said no. That's how he became governor. No, I mean, he wasn't in office at a very popular time to be governor, because a lot of things that he did restrained the spending of state government, and you generally don't get too popular when you're not handing out all kinds of goodies to everybody. I mean, he didn't do that, and he was very fiscally conservative, and got the budget back in order during his time as governor. When I first came into the legislature, which is 1978, hard to believe that, but that just means I'm old. But anyway, in 78, I was to be his seatmate, and he was still in the legislature. And then Thompson appointed him as liaison between the legislature, the Senate and the House, and the governor's office. So he moved out. A fellow named Babe Woodyard moved in, and Babe Woodyard and I became very good friends. But my association with Jim Edgar was very limited during my legislative time. But then he was very visible. I mean, on the House and Senate floor, he worked for Governor Thompson, and whenever decisions had to be made that affected the legislature and the governor's office, he was involved. So he learned early on the art of compromise, and he knew it had to be done to get anything accomplished. And that's really kind of how you got to start. And then he got appointed Secretary of State, and then of course that's when everything broke for him.
Well, I just thought the fellowship program that he developed after leaving office. I know I have to think when people leave politics, gosh, what do I do with all this knowledge and what I've learned? And it just sounds like he found the sweet spot.
Well, it's incredible the number of people in state government now, mostly staff and all, that participated in that. Anyway, there's an awful lot of alumni up there in Springfield right now that went through that and stayed in state government, and I'm sure that the valuable information and knowledge they gained through Edgar's program is benefiting them now. So,
watching him and the way he worked in addressing lawmakers, how was that? Certainly came in with firm ideas and what he thought were priorities, but how was he different in working with people than some of his successors?
Well, he was not like Jim Thompson. I mean, Jim Thompson was let's make a deal. He was always looking for something to get done, and he knew that he could get it done if he got the right people in the room, and generally he did. Jim Edgar was much more cautious, and just their personalities were entirely different. Jim Edgar was more reserved, very quiet, didn't drink, and he just was so much different than Jim Thompson. But he was very effective at what he did, and a very good governor as a result, just because he had to say no, and he did it, and willing to do it.
I guess a great part of the story is continuing to be relevant until he left us. He was, and certainly the Fellows program helped, but that's a pretty impressive record because a lot of people just. I know you have great relationships out there, but his his act after politics, second act, whatever you want to call it, certainly worked out well, and he was respected. Even I look here at some of the quotes by a lot of people who served well after the Edgar era.
Well, as time goes on, people either become better at what they did, in the public's eyes, or they get worse. Jim Edgar, as time goes on, will be viewed upon as an excellent governor who did the right thing at the right time and that had to be done. And he may have not been the flashy type governor that some would have wanted, maybe even, but he was very effective in what he did and very good man.
What would you say was his best achievement or two in your eyes over the 90s?
Well, getting the budget in order was significant. I mean, that had to be done, and sometimes the legislature doesn't have the courage to do it. somebody has to step up and do it for them, and Jim Edgar did that, and as a result, got the budget back in order. He was very active in the school construction program. In fact, we passed education reform while he was governor, both for Chicago and for the state, which was really significant legislation at the time. And at that time we thought, well, we've ended the funding crisis for education. Well, I don't think that'll ever end, but anyway, you throw a lot of money at it, and deservedly so in some cases, I guess. But those two things are the school's construction. Well, you can look around the state and you'll see schools all over the state that were built during the 90s, and as a result of his school construction program, and that was a huge benefit to local school districts. Didn't have to spend the money. They got grants from the state. Obviously, buildings were built that needed to be, so the students probably got a lot of benefit from that. So there was a lot done during his time. Like I said, they tried to attempt to get the budget or the pension mess in order, but that unfortunately in time didn't work out. But he was willing to meet an issue head on and try to work with everybody to resolve it. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't.
Now the Chicago factor. Now some people will talk from the I don't like Chicago angle, but just looking from the practical angle, where you're dealing with the third biggest metro area in the country, and then you're dealing with I know the 90s was a time of great urban sprawl as more and more people moved out to the burbs and farm fields became homes to these big subdivisions and new housing, people moving further and further out from the loop. What did he do in those times? What was the benefit of having Jim Edgar in office for the Greenvilles and the Litchfields, the Hillsboroughs, and the Carlinvilles of the world?
Well, being a downstater, he recognized the issues that were important to us. And I think I just remember when we did welfare reform. You know, everybody else talked about how that was a city problem, but it was a problem all over the state. And in '94, I believe it was, we tackled that. He knew that welfare needed to be addressed, and people needed to start becoming more responsible for what they do and what their life. And he, being a downstater, recognized that. And I just think also the ethanol issue was very prominent during his time in office, and that's, of course, the farmers of downstate Illinois. So he had the fact that he went to Eastern Illinois University from Charleston, I think was a big plus for us downstate to have him in that governor's office.
Boy, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think of that farm crisis of the 80s, and I knew it was something. But I went to the St. Isidore Awards up there in Litchfield, and all of a sudden you have two or three farmers talking about their experiences like a war veteran, as far as, not trying to compare that to war, but as far as just that look in their eye, where they're talking about a moment in time and they're back there. I mean, they are back in that moment and talking about, well, I loved my farm, but I told my son to do something else. And that really hit a nerve. So I have to think plugging in ethanol and giving farmers a little more versatility, another market to make a buck, had to be crucial, not only for the bottom line, but just optimism.
Yeah, that was a very difficult time for agriculture. Land prices started really going up, and of course, interest rates had just kind of started coming down. But still, there was a significant cost of buying ground. And so I think a lot of your family farms, the people that grew up on a family farm, their dad farmed, they farmed, they wanted their son to farm. Maybe they changed their attitude a little bit, because that during that time is when the family farm started to slip, and then more corporate farming came in, big farming from wherever come in, buy your property and turn it into a corporate farm. Yeah, I can see where that had an impact on people's family traditions of keeping it in the family, and that unfortunately that's a whole different time. That was a much better time back then.
Well, you talk about being down to earth. I know sometimes guys change a formula after they're sworn in. I remember George Ryan was all chummy with reporters, and then as soon as he was inaugurated, someone asked him a tough question, and he pulled out this petition or whatever. Hey, if you don't like it, you can run. And Blagojevich had his entourage, and the state police fellow who had the mission of carrying the hairbrush. Jim Edgar, I don't think there was much that changed about the man when he took the governor's office. I'll never forget being at White Oaks, seeing him at JCPenney. Brenda wasn't there. There was no entourage. He didn't tip off the White Oaks Mall security people. He just said, I need a pair of pants, and I'm going to pick it up just like anybody. And that seems to be not only an event, but kind of I don't know if you'd call it a metaphor or what you'd call it, but that seems to be an apt, I don't know if description's the word, but a real example of how down to earth he could be.
Well, he definitely was down to earth, and I don't think he changed one iota once he became governor, and even afterwards. I'd see him driving his car around. I mean, they're just the different type of person has, he took the moral high ground on everything, and he stuck to it. I mean, he didn't change, and the bright lights and all the publicity and didn't change him. I mean, he was the same man he was going into the office as he was coming out. And I don't think he changed much over the years after that either.
Personally, just talking about the loss and knowing him like you did, just what's your sense of loss when it comes to Jim Edgar, the person?
Well, this is a different individual that we're talking about here, and that was in politics. And his wife Brenda, their two kids. I mean, they were very special people, and lived in Springfield, lived in the mansion. He very unassuming guy, and it's a tremendous loss for Illinois. I mean, because he stayed active in politics. I mean, he was on the TV programs during the election, and people were constantly searching his advice on things. It's going to be a loss. I just feel that way, and we'll get through this, but it's going to be a different time without him.
He sure had good people around him, didn't he? I mean, I could talk to Mike Lawrence for a day and a half. Mike Lawrence and Kirk Dillard, who had a pretty good shot at governor there with that late rally, but didn't quite happen. He had an all-star staff.
He did, and that is the thing that makes a lot of people good, is who surrounds them. They pick people. You can tell a lot about an individual, about who they pick to be in their cabinets or their advisors or what. And he had excellent people around him that he sought out to get advice. He didn't. It wasn't just Jim Edgar this, Jim Edgar that. No, he brought in people. Steve Schnorf is the one I think I can think of right quick. And you mentioned some others, George Flessley. I mean, these are people that were dedicated to what they did, and Jim gave them all the responsibility that he could to carry out their mission.
Well, longtime senator, former Senate Minority Leader Frank Watson, thank you so much, and appreciate your time.
Not a problem, Sean. Wish it had been a different circumstance, but I'm glad to visit.